I welcome you to this session on extremism, religion, and politics. I don't know how we'll proceed after this very delicious lunch and very heavy sessions and with another heavy session. So I think, Dr. Ismail, you need to provide us with some coffee somewhere around this session.
Yes, sir.
And I think that will help all of us.
Turkish coffee.
Well, extremism, religion, and politics. I think they are very important keywords for the strange phenomena of the Muslim world, or parts of the Muslim world, and parts of the world at large are suffering. And this is the first time that we face such a big problem, a global problem of terrorism emanated from a claim to religion, a claim to Islam. And we will dwell here on its relation with politics. I think in our day, in these days, we need to give bigger attention to this phenomena of extremism, radicalism, and terrorism, and its influence on our daily life, on economic life, and on international relations. In 2009, I published a book about Islamic world in the new century. And I made 2 points. It was a book on the history of OIC in 40 years, and then some reflections how would be the Muslim world in the new century, which is the 21st century, of course. I alluded to 2 points. The first point was the relation between politics and religion. And I gave 2 examples of countries where officially adopt secularism, which my country is one of them, and countries where Islamic law was part of legislation and there was no kind of clear relationship between religion and politics, and where state apparatus dominate politics. So in a way, I was saying that in Turkey, in the secularism of Turkey, the domination of a state on politics did not bring the good governance it was needed. So I was saying that there should not be that much as if it was in the Kemalist regime and then in 50s, 60s, 70s. That book was printed in 2009, and the relationship between state and religion was going more in a smooth way. But on the other hand, you had countries where Islamic, quote-unquote, movements were saying, we have to dominate the state. So I said that the future of politics and the future of development of our societies would be really guided by a mutual respect between the 2 spheres, sphere of state and politics and the sphere of religion, that each sphere respect the other and not should be domination from side on the other. And I have differentiated between the French laïcité, being laïque, and the English or the American secularism. And I thought that what benefit, at least my country, is not laïque à la française, but secular à l'américain. Now, we have seen what has happened from Islamic State, discussions and attempts to rule according to what they think Islamic. The second point I raised in my book was a reference to the compatibility between democracy, as already discussed here, meaning European Western multi-party system, the compatibility between this democracy and Islam. And I said that we have to advance democracy in our countries. And I had certain points that there was no specific in Islam, as it is claimed by those Islamists, that there is no fixed setup of the state apparatus, how state should be. There are only principles of good governance mentioned in the scripture, in the Holy Quran, and these principles of good governance include consultations, etc., etc. And I gave examples of historical practices in modern Islam, which I referred to yesterday, that in the end of 19th century, the first parliament was established, the constitution in 1876, and then assembly of deputies, assembly of notables or senators was established. And that I put all these arguments to show that compatibility between Islam and modern democracy is visible. And we have to work on this. That was my second point. Now, the case today, particularly after what has known as the Arab Spring, and I think this was a misleading appellation. And in those days, I preferred to use not Arab Spring appellation, I used the downfall or the autumn of dictators, because that was the case. Dictators went, but spring didn't come. Winter prevailed. So the spring will come when we really have democracy, and that would need long time. The way to democracy is not easily paved, and it is not. It's full of hindrances, and all discussion this morning and yesterday was around that. Then we came to the point where we are facing extremism, not only in ideological, political sense, but extremism and radicalism mixed with terrorism. Just remember the few big terrorist attacks, Paris, Ankara, and some other places in Africa, and you name it. Every day we hear 100, 50, 100, 60 people here and there. So we need really to understand why this extremism and radical extremism and this violence is there. And of course, I will not go to the reasons for that, because I think many of those factors who brought terrorism are known to everybody. Political reasons, absence of freedom of expression, absence of freedom of association, social ones, poverty, economic ones, unfair distribution of wealth, and ideological. And ideological here is very important, because the problem we are facing in the Muslim world, that Islam has been ideologized. A version of what has been known as Salafi Islam, radicalized, and then you have a new ideology. I always said in 80s that I wish, or 90s, that I wish communism was not over. Because when you had the communism prevailing in certain parts of the world, you have radical movements under the name of Marxism, Leninism, Maoism, etc. But all that finished, and what has to replace was something newly invented and called Islamism, Islamic movement, Islamic ideology. And of course, a wrong interpretation of jihad, which doesn't mean necessarily war. It means excel, it means utmost efforts to attain good objectives, etc. This has been, Islam has been mixed with all of this, and now we have this, what we see, of Qaeda, of ISIL, etc. So why all this happened? 25 years, yesterday and today, 25 years ago with the end of the Soviet Union and the collapse of Berlin Wall, the third wave, as Huntington used to say, third wave of democracy came, which presidents and scholars yesterday explained to us in East Europe, Southeast Europe, the Balkans. Democratic transformation happened. But when we come to this part of the world, you don't see a similar transformation. And you see that instead of having democratic institutions built up, democratic culture developed, you find that you have this radicalism, you have this extremism, you have this fanaticism. That needs to be understood. Why? I have here a point to make that when just after the fall of the Berlin Wall, a year later, Iraq invaded Kuwait. And that was a big trauma, beginning of big traumas in the Middle East. Then you have the 9/11. And in between you have problems in Afghanistan, etc., Taliban, etc., so they were very active. Qaeda, all over. And then in 2003, you have the invasion, American invasion of Iraq. So while East Europe, Southeast Europe, the Balkans were struggling to build a culture of democracy, institutions of democracy, and transform from one-party system to a multi-party system, separation of powers, etc., rule of law, you had here a turmoil in the Middle East because of these inventions from inside and from outside. And then, of course, you have the radical movements flourishing in this context of fighting. And then, on the top of that, you have an extra problem when the Americans built the new regime of Iraq on sectarian lines. Sectarian lines that you have Kurds, you have Sunnis, you have Shias. This position has to go to Kurds, this position has to Sunnis, etc., and they created a dichotomy or split in the society and in the state, rupture. And they demolished the army, they demolished the party, etc. They did just the opposite of what they advised the Russians not to do. They advised the Russians not to dissolve the bureaucracy, the army, the party, etc. They did exactly the opposite in Iraq. With all this havoc, what you expect from young people? Politically motivated, they want to serve their country, they want to serve their ideas, they want to have a say in their countries, and they cannot find an outlet. You had two outlets available, mosques and prisons. Mosques and prisons. And from out of mosques and prisons, you have this brand of Islam. So we really have to understand this very well, and why we have here violence, extremism, radicalism. We don't have democracy. Now, when we came to 2010, in the Muslim world and at the world at large, we missed one good example. And I wish President Rosa Otambayeva was here. The revolt of the Kyrgyz people in summer 2010. They arose against corruption, against the oligarchic system of the former Soviet leftover politicians. I was the Secretary General of OIC in those days, and we helped a lot the Kyrgyz people, and President Rosa She was not president. She was acting. She was then agreed upon to be acting president, and she led the country through transition. Now we have multi-party system and peaceful change of power through elections. This is the first example in former Soviet Union Asian republics, which is purely Muslim country. They have majority of Kyrgyz and minority of Uzbek, and that was the reason of conflict between what happened in those days. And then what you have here in this area, and the failure of many countries to establish democracy. We have another exception here in this part of the world, which is Tunisia. And Tunisia deserves leaders of civil society the Nobel Prize this year. Why Tunisia succeeded where some other countries failed? This is a question to ponder upon. Tunisia was the most advanced country among North African countries from education point of view. The middle class, about 75% of the population was middle class. Strong trade unions, strong media, and strong women movement. And I think wisdom of the Islamic leader, Mr. Ghannouchi, his wisdom and his cooperation with other brokers of power there, managed to get through the whole turmoil, and they ended with having a new constitution, new election, new president, parliament, government, etc. Now they started, because the statistics of Tunisian society put it in a place that it can develop modern Western style or multi-party system. Now, there are certain lessons to take from these examples, that democracy is feasible. As I said in the very beginning, they're compatible with Islam. Secondly, we have to organize the relation between religion and politics, between religion and state. And let me repeat again, American secularism is a much better example to follow than French laïcism. My last point, of course, we have to know that there are impediments to build democracy in our societies. These impediments are many. First of all, there is no institutions. You have to build institutions. Secondly, you have to build the culture of democracy. You have a culture of obedience. Culture of obedience. This is decades of autocratic rule, and you have to replace this culture of obedience with democratic culture. But this will take education. It was said this morning repeatedly, education, education. I think that is the thrust of the whole thing. Independent judiciary. We're glad to see good examples in certain countries of good judiciary. Now, reform of democracy, when you read the literature by the Council of Europe, there are 3 studies, Dr. Saguddin, which I'm sure you should have, I'm sure you people would get it for you. If not, I will be helpful. 3 studies made by Council of Europe on the reform of democracy after the expansion of democracy, expansion of Council of Europe to 47 countries. The issues tackled there are different than the issues we are tackling here. So we have really to think of building democracy in our own societies. And by doing this, we have to get in consideration the fact of Islam with the parameters I alluded to. Secondly, with building institutions, and with building traditions. With these few remarks, I thank you for giving me this opportunity to introduce this panel. And I would like now to introduce the first speaker. The first speaker is supposed to be Dr. Nagm, but I think for certain procedural matters, as Dr. Ismail was saying, he could not be here. And kindly, Dr. Sirajuddin will deliver his own ideas on the subject. Dr. Sirajuddin, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'd like to re-emphasize that this is not the paper of Dr. Nagm. He was bringing his own paper when he came, but these are my own remarks. So if you get angry with me, not with him, because he's not responsible for them. Mr. Chairman, I will speak in English so that my words will be more easily accessible to our guests who do not speak Arabic, knowing as I do that the material that I present is probably well known in its Arabic original to the Arabic speakers in the audience. I would like to offer a few vignettes from True Islam, which also respond to what the murderous bigots of Daesh and their ilk claim. Our values like pluralism, the rule of law, equality before the law, freedom of expression compatible with Islam, true Islam? And I say yes. So allow me to address three questions. First, how should Muslims relate to non-Muslims? Second, what can we say about Sharia law? Third, what can we say about freedom of expression? So on pluralism, how Muslims should relate to non-Muslims, there is no question that we are instructed to peaceful coexistence. In the Holy Quran, it says there is no compunction in religion, la ikraha fi din, and even instructions to the Prophet that to speak to the non-believers and say, to you your religion, to me mine, lakum dinukum waliya din. But beyond the Prophet's own example and his constitution of Medina, which I have already mentioned, and his general amnesty of his enemies when he entered Mecca, the example was picked up and implemented by his companions and followers. Now, it is unfortunate that in the West, we do not know much about Umar ibn al-Khattab, during whose 10-year reign, 634 to 644 AD, Islam was transformed from a local phenomenon to a vast empire. Now, Umar was a brilliant jurist and a remarkable ruler by any standard, but certainly a most extraordinary figure in his day in the 7th century of our era. Indeed, in many of these conquests, the Muslim armies were remarkably disciplined, and in some cases, the cities and territories passed under Muslim sovereignty by simple treaty agreements. This we know from the entry of the Muslims into Jerusalem in the 7th century under Umar, where he gave the Christians of Jerusalem a very benign agreement or contract known as the Umari Covenant, safeguarding all Christian churches, allowing them to continue to manage their affairs. And Muslim law would only apply in cases where there was a conflict between a Muslim and a Christian. Moved by the generosity of the offer, 7th century, the Patriarch asked Umar to pray in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, and Umar refused. The Patriarch asked, why, do we not pray for the same God? And Umar said, yes, but if I pray in your church, my followers will turn it into a mosque. So they crossed the street and prayed in a small vacant plot of land, and now on this is where the Mosque of Umar stands in Jerusalem. Again, that same discipline was seen at the time of Saladin the Great, Salah ad-Din al-Ayyubi, who after the Battle of Hattin in 1189 entered Jerusalem and gave safe conduct to all the Christians, including the King of Jerusalem, Guy de Lusignan, his wife Sibylla, and even those who fought in the Christian army. Indeed, it was under Saladin's protection that the Jewish community re-entered Jerusalem at the end of the 12th century. The Greek Orthodox Christians were treated even better because they had opposed the Crusades from the beginning. Then think of Andalusia. What a marvelous mix of different communities where Jews, Christians, and Muslims consorted together, produced great poetry, architecture, science, philosophy, and literature. This contrasts with the conditions imposed by the Catholics after the defeat of the Arabs in Cordoba in 1492, not to mention the infamous Inquisition that followed, the Spanish Inquisition, set up by King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Castile in 1478 with the approval of Pope Sixtus IV. The Roman Inquisition set up by Pope Paul III in 1542 supervised all the inquisitions against heretics, and may I remind you, the most famous of all these trials was Galileo in 1633, who was forced to recant his scientific findings. So, yes, pluralism, openness, yes. Second, the rule of law. Omar's letter to the Qadi is a prime example. Now, from the time of Omar, again, 7th century, there were laws governing what was allowed in war. These laws, operative at the time of Omar, were the prototypes of what in the 20th century would become the Geneva Conventions. In the 7th century, Muslims ruled that there could be no attack on non-combatants, no destruction of property, no taking of hostages, and no environmental destruction, not cutting down a palm tree, nor a depletion of a well, Radmebir. This unbelievably progressive, especially when you think of what was the standard of 7th century warfare. But the most stunning example of that progressive jurisprudence is a letter by Umar ibn al-Khattab to Qadi Abu Musa al-Ash'ari. He's appointing him as a judge. It's a one-page letter of instructions that he gave a scholar he was appointing as a judge. And despite its being from the 7th century, it is so modern in its concepts that few Westerners can believe it when they see it. For it deals with many issues that contemporary Western jurisprudence is still struggling with to this day. For example, the presumption of innocence. البينة على من ادعى واليمين على من أنكر. Omar's instruction is the burden of proof is on the accuser, from the accused, only a declaration of innocence under faith. All he has to do is to swear, I am not guilty. This is unbelievable in the 7th century. If we look back at the history of jurisprudence throughout the Middle Ages, people would use torture to extract confessions from the accused as a standard operating procedure. Omar says, justice delayed is justice denied. For the time must be fixed. For justice that is not swift is not fair. The rich can afford to wait, the poor cannot. Confronting the accuser, Omar demanded that the accused should be able to confront his accuser before witnesses and the judge. This principle was essential to ensure fairness in the opinions of the judge after hearing the opinions of all concerned. Equality before the law. Omar instructs the judge to treat all equally in the court and to accept the testimony of all witnesses equally. But maybe something that modern judges would benefit from, he says, to be willing to reconsider. If your conscience troubles you, to use my words, don't let your ego stand in the way, says Omar to the judge. For it is far better to reverse yourself in front of the people than to let injustice continue, which I think is a marvelous thing to say. Now, there are 3 other rulings, also from that period, also by Omar, that are not explicitly listed in that brief one-page letter, but we know that he made them. The first of these is that evidence gathered illegally is not acceptable as evidence. An accusation made by a person breaching the rights of privacy was void. You cannot break the law in the name of maintaining the law. To this day, this is a major issue in law enforcement in advanced countries, such as the United States, where questions about the rights of due process and guarantees of adequate systems of gathering evidence were already being foreshadowed almost 1,400 years ago. Then, Omar extended the social security system of his time, which was the public treasury, alms and taxes, revenues of which were distributed to the poor and destitute. He extended it to Muslims and non-Muslims alike. And he was named Al-Faruq, the just, by his non-Muslim subjects. Omar was severe, and he challenged his own judges and governors with conflict of interest laws. Min ayna laka hadha? Now, reflecting on that body of jurisprudence coming out of the small village of Al-Madinah in Arabia in the 7th century of our era is indeed eye-opening. So far from thinking it as retrograde, there is much in Sharia that lends itself to contemporary and modern interpretations. If Muslims today only had a small fraction of the courage of those early Muslims, for Omar was able, in his time, to change parts of the law, even though it was stated clearly in the Quran and was part of the practice of the Prophet, he said, conditions have changed. قضية المؤلفة قلوبهم. And I won't get into the details of that, but if he could say that 6 years after the death of the Prophet, what would he do today with the information revolution, with the world we live in? He would not at all stick with what was said 1,000 years ago. Let me move on that and remind you only before I leave behind the story of Omar that these events I'm talking about are exactly 1,000 years. 641 to 1633, the trial of Galileo. 1,000 years later, Galileo was still forced to put his hand and swear that the earth was not moving in order not to be tortured and burned alive. So, third, on the freedom of expression. We need freedom of expression, for it is the first freedom without which you cannot have political accountability, or artistic creativity, or scientific inquiry, or to introduce the new. Now, throughout the Middle Ages, the Muslims would go on to build a vast and tolerant empire, many empires, that promoted learning, science, and philosophy. The writings of Plato and Aristotle were translated and studied, and they were referred to as al-Hakimain, meaning the two wise men. No one burned or banned their books. Instead, they were taught and discussed. In fact, with the possible exception of Nalanda, there is no incident of Muslims burning libraries. Abu Ala al-Mawdudi, Abu Ala al-Ma'arri is a blind poet. Abu Ala al-Ma'arri was a blind poet in 10th century Syria who wrote violent attacks against religion, against the prophets, against the holy texts, and against God himself. Not only did not anyone do anything to him, his contemporaries even recognized his talent as a poet and his standing as a linguist, even as they disagreed with his religious views. So what about the offensive cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad and the reactions of so many Muslims around the world? What I regret in that episode is the reaction of leaders and opinion makers among Western societies and non-Muslims towards these cartoons. Reflect for a moment. If these cartoons were anti-Semitic cartoons or racist cartoons, what would have been the reaction of the leaders of society against them? I think they would have said that they reject them, and they would have even denounced them, but they would have recognized the right of the authors and publishers to print them, for that is the tax we pay for freedom of expression. But in the case of the cartoons that we're talking about, they did not say this. They did not do this. They considered that the very act of printing these offensive cartoons was itself something to be glorified and supported. Now, what we seek is a societal rejection of the promoters of hate speech, of stereotyping, while still allowing them to exercise their right to free speech. Voltaire's famous phrase, "I may disagree with you, but I will lay down my life to protect your right to say that with which I disagree," applies here. And what about the offended Muslims, myself included? There, the instructions of the Quran and the history of the Prophet are to be our guide. The Quran says that those who believe, when addressed by the ignorant, simply say peace. وَإِذَا خَاطَبَهُمُ الْجَاهِلُونَ قَالُوا سَلَامًا. And so, the Prophet never returned an insult against anyone, even those who tried to murder him and his companions, who stoned him and who would throw dirt over his head when he was praying in Mecca. In fact, when the Muslims were strong enough to re-enter Mecca, he declared a general amnesty for all of them. And so, confronted with the cartoons, I would simply regret that offensive slur and say peace and move on. Giving importance to these slurs and offensive cartoons simply gives them more importance than they deserve. Indeed, were it not for the fuss that they generated, they would have been forgotten by now for sure. And so I hope that these discussions, these few vignettes, have been helpful to our non-Muslim colleagues to show realities in the world beyond the stereotypes. But I believe that the constitutional arrangements that we will adopt in our own countries should not be just a following of Sharia. It can be inspired by it, but not following it. For I believe it is time, in fact, that we adopt a pluralistic constitution that does not favor one religion over another, and puts all citizens as equals before the law, men and women, Muslim and non-Muslim. The true Muslims should have no difficulty in accepting that, as the laws will in most cases reflect that same spirit of openness and tolerance that we find in these historical examples that I have cited. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Srageddin. If this was not a paper prepared, what about if it was prepared? Now, I have the pleasure of introducing... I have the pleasure of introducing Bishop Gunnar Starset. Bishop Starset is a well-known figure in the dialogue between followers of different religions, between cultures, and international God. He was a bishop of Oslo. He was a leader of a center party and Secretary General of the Lutheran World Federation. He is honorary president of Religions for Peace and former member of the Nobel Peace Prize Committee. Bishop Starset, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to the two of you who have given a very fundamental basis for the discussion on this topic, both our respected chair and our respected librarian. You have laid a very good foundation for further reflection, and you have offered us a very persuasive perspective from the Muslim point of view, one which I fully share. I come into it from a different entry point with my remarks, but it is the same issue. An anecdote which I like from the Nordic context: two old Norwegians were sitting together and speaking about the sad situation in the world, and one said to the other, "There will never be peace in the world before we all speak the same language." And the other said, "How are we going to teach them all Norwegian?" In this context, we are speaking the same language, whether it comes from Islamic speakers, Muslim speakers, Christians, Jewish, Hindus, Buddhists. We have a common language of peace and human dignity. And as we use this vocabulary, we also have that inner understanding that we can speak about it only in a self-critical way and with humility. The issue before us, extremism, religion, and politics, the three words, are very interesting in their composition. Extremism relates to religion and to politics in equally destructive ways. Religion and politics are sometimes put in tension with each other, as we see in the discussion about secularism and secularity, and as we see in many historic given examples. But they do not necessarily need to be in conflict with each other. And I think that is the language we seek through dialogue, to develop that understanding that religion and politics are not enemies or destructive to each other. Why not? Because the issue is values. Religion is about values. Politics is about values. I worked for 10 years in Geneva, and there was one place where we used to have meetings and conferences, and I always got a kick out of coming into that hotel because there was a sign on the wall in the reception in a sort of awkward English. The sign read, "Please leave your values at the front desk." And this is a good reminder that values and valuables are different things. But it also is necessary to say that values and valuables relate to each other. Some of the discussion we've had so far here has brought that anecdote to mind, because we can speak about economy, we can speak about social development, we can speak about that which is a success for any state in materialistic terms, and not being aware of the value dimension, that of human dignity, of human rights, of tolerance, of affirmation of the rights for people who are regarded as less important in society. So the composition of value and valuables is also one of these. You can put them in a sort of a contrast to each other, but I believe that they belong together. Friends, this is an auspicious day of two reasons. One, the 10th of December is the International Day of Human Rights. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights is, or should be, celebrated around the world, because the Declaration of Human Rights has been signed by all the members of the United Nations. It is also a reminder that this is a year when we celebrate the UNESCO's Declaration on Principles of Tolerance. These two documents, among many others, form the foundation on which international law has been developed in the context of the history of the last 70 years or so. And I believe, also from my theological reflection, that when we speak about extremism, speak about religion and politics, we have to find a language which is within that dialogue expressed in such fundamental documents on which not one civilization is built, but on which civilizations are built. So the 10th of December is the day for honoring the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. The 16th of November is the Universal Day for Tolerance, but I put them together because it is this year of 20 years since that principle of tolerance was signed. For me personally, of course, 10th of December is also the day of great importance, because this is a day when the Nobel Peace Prize is awarded. It is decided on earlier. I've had the privilege to serve on the Nobel Committee off and on since 1985. I have been a voting member for 17 years, and sometimes I need to say, when people are critical of one or the other of the prizes, which is natural, then I say, maybe I was not in the committee that year. And that has gotten me out of some difficulties. But I was in the committee last year when we gave the Nobel Peace Prize to Malala and Satyarthi. And this was the first time that the Nobel Committee very specifically mentioned the religion, the religious identity and the national identity of the two laureates. The girl, 16 years then, Malala from Pakistan, and Satyarthi, 60 years old, a Hindu from India. Even by mentioning these two countries, the committee sort of alluded to one of the great issues of peace and human rights and lack of reconciliation today. But more importantly, these two personalities, they got the prize because of their dedication to education for the young people. And that sets also the issues before us in the right perspective. Today, I got at 3 o'clock an SMS from my son, who took my seat in the City Hall today, because I had chosen, upon the invitation from our friend Sarah Geldin, to be here. And why would I be here? Because I wanted to listen to the sort of discussion which we have had today and yesterday. I wanted to see the decision by the Nobel Committee to give the Peace Prize of this year. I was not part of that decision because I'm now an alternate to the committee, to the Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet. And my son sent me that SMS, "Dear Father, it was wonderful. It was a moment to be proud of for all those who work for peace and reconciliation." And they came through with a wonderful message. I was proud, and I sensed how important it is that there are institutions that promote peace and justice. What did they say in the declaration from the Nobel Committee? They honored this Tunisian National Dialogue Quartet because they were committed to a pluralistic democracy. They honored them because they show that civil society organizations, and there I include religion, civil society organizations sometimes can pave the way where politicians are not able to find a solution. The four of them represented labor and confederation, that is those who give the work, industry, human rights, and lawyers. And they call them a moral authority in the country. And I think, again, this is the issue of value, of morals, related to challenging political issues. They also mentioned in the statement that they were working for consensus-based solutions across political and religious divides. And they said that this is an example that Islamists and secular movements can work together for national progress. To me, these two associations in my mind with December 10 give me the broad spectrum of where religion belongs. Religion for better, I don't say better or worse, I say for better and worse. Religion, all religion is interpreted religion. We have been reminded of that. Interpretations have been given. And there is no religion as it appears without being interpreted. That is what allows for the many divisions within Christianity and Islam and Judaism and Hinduism and so on. So religion is interpreted religion, and that gives us a sense of humility. But religion, the strength of religion in the context where we are speaking today is that religion is the greatest network of networks around the world. Religion is present in every town and in every village. If we harness only one religion, we lose that vision of religion as a concerted effort across cultural, social, and political boundaries to provide for peace and for human rights. But there is religion for better and worse. Religion is not democratic. Religion is a power structure. In this best case, it offers full participation of men and women, but it is very hierarchical, and therefore it challenges and it provokes so many in a generation where democracy and participation is the norm and should be the norm. Extremism today. This will be my last point, Mr. Chairman, and I'll come back later to other points. Extremism today. The convergence and synergy between nationalistic, ethnic, even race and religious extremism is the greatest challenge. And sometimes when we say that is an extremist or violent extremism, sometimes we need to look at what is it really. It's too easy to say it's religious extremism, because religion is never alone in this. Nationalism is also never alone in it, because there is an element of, or a case for being proud of your nation. But there is the perversion of national identity, perversion of religious identity, a perversion of your race, even if we usually don't use that, but I use it of one particular reason, because I'll give the example. This is what we are challenged with today. It is this convergence, this amplification of extremism, because it occurs. And it is in all religions and in all regions, except perhaps in Latin America. But in all religions and in all regions. The Buddhist religion, I know the Buddhists well. I'm a good friend of Dalai Lama. This is how the Europeans see Buddhism. In Myanmar, Buddhist monks have had the onslaught on innocent Muslims. And that attitude has come further to Sri Lanka and to certain areas in Thailand. The Hindu nationalism, which is now growing in India, which demands reconversion of Muslims and Christians. A certain form of Jewish nationalism, where the demand is to have a constitution which makes the Palestinians living, or the Arab living in Israel, second-class citizens. Christians, the Russian Orthodox Church is today, and I say that with great sadness because I'm a friend of the Russian Orthodox Church, and I know the Patriarch very well. But the development that we have seen there is a Christian nationalism which is destructive. The only way out of this is dialogue, tolerance, respect, recognition, and readiness to walk the path together towards human rights, peace, on the basis of recognition of human dignity. Thank you.
Thank you for your wonderful representation. Now I have the pleasure and honor of inviting our master professor, Ahmed Kamal Aboul Magd. I think those who are associated with the Bibliotheca Alexandrina doesn't need me to introduce him. But what I'd like just to say that Professor Aboul Magd is a mentor and a great scholar whom we take him as a reference in Islamic studies and in his attempts to bridge the gap between different schools of thoughts. And his works, his published works, are references for all those who are working in this field. Professor Aboul Magd, despite all his heavy schedule and engagements, kindly participating in this session, and we look forward for his contribution. Professor, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much for this kind introduction. But I always feel that the whole context, cultural context in the Arab world particularly, needs a correction and a reorientation. My explanation of this introduction is very simple. I was raised in a Muslim family. My father was a counselor, head of a tribunal, whose job was domestic relations under Islamic law. And we were living in Abbasiyah, not very far from the police academy. And I remember very well that the building was owned by a good Christian family. And I found myself later on, I always assumed that they were very good people because there were many air raids. We used to go downstairs to the bottom of the building, and my father would say some prayers, Muslim prayers. Every time he stopped, Mr. Fahmi, Mr. Khalil, said, "Sakit ليه يا أبو المجد بيه? Why did you stop? Please say your prayers, and we will say Amin, Amin." I always assumed that it was one religion and one culture. So we went together with son of that family to a secondary school, well known in Abbasiyya, فؤاد الأول الثانوية. And there were other students much older than we are. But we were disciplined in another school, Farouk al-Awwal. So when we went there, I found out that many students were much older than I was. But then came a mother of a Christian, from a Christian family, carrying in her hand the passport of her daughter and warning me. She said, "I'm giving you her passport." Another member, black member of a terrorist group, wanted to impose on her and to get married to her. She said, "I'm warning you, Mr. Aboul Magd, don't let him get this passport. You have to defend her right to continue to be a good Christian." So, fortunately, 1 month later, there were political problems in Egypt. And a clergyman who eventually was assassinated with President Sadat the day of the killing of President Sadat. He came just a few weeks before that incident, and he said, "I'm coming to warn you, never give her this passport, because a terrorist black man is threatening her that if she does not get to marry him, he will assassinate her." I didn't know what to do. But then came an Egyptian clergy, Christian. I told him this story. He said, "Well, don't you worry, give me her passport." I told him, "Please don't give it to her. I'll get in trouble with her family." He said, No, don't you worry." To my astonishment, 3 days later, he came and said, "I convinced them not to pressure her. She will continue to be Christian," and she rejected the offer of marriage of that man. And he asked me to give him all the files of Christian students who stopped going back, and he wanted to convince them that they have to go back to their home to serve their country. There were half a block upstairs. I went and I found all the files of those whom we used to call R2R, refusing to return. And he said he will try to convince them to go back home, which we did. He did beautifully. 3 days later, he came and he said, "I met this black American. He's a terrorist, and he's threatening me that if I don't agree, he will kill her and will kill me." Astonished, I was really astonished. He met with him once or twice and convinced him to give up this aggressive attitude. Then I had a previous experience in the secondary school, and this secondary school also worth telling something about. The students were much older than we were, and some of the students, I'm sure you know their names, Fuad al-Muhandis, Salah Zulfaqar, this group, they were much older than we were.
Great Egyptian artists, movies.
Yes. But they were very nice, and they told, and I wasn't aware of these religious differences. So I used to say my prayer in there is special place for prayer in that school. He said, "Okay, أنا هنفخ الكرة. I will inflate the ball while you say that." I said, "Why don't you come with me?" He said, "No, I cannot come. I'm Christian." I didn't react at all. I said, "Okay, I will not be late. It will be 10 minutes. We will play football together." So that was the atmosphere where we used to have our relationship. We assumed that all these people were good people. And my father, who was a religious Rais, Supreme Islamic Court, he used to be an arbitrator between the whole inhabitants in this building. If someone gets in trouble with his wife, or a wife gets in trouble with her husband, they would come to my father, and I remember him doing like this: if you don't treat her well, I will not let you even see her. And he was typically old Jewish, and he has a big, سميها إيه بقى. But he would be afraid of my father, and he has to come few days and be assured that he stopped hurting her, and she would come. And he was a nice guy, بس يعني المشكلة, the religious problem seemed to be يعني separating them. So we were brought up in an atmosphere that did not know or even hear of religious يعني discrimination. I remember, like up till now, I remember my mother asking one son of this family, اسمه فهيم, Fahim, you are getting old. It will be difficult for you to find a nice wife. فيقول لها, you know, I'm Egyptian Christian, and few Egyptian girls of the Christian creed or religion would not like. She wants to be a queen. And I remember my mother telling him, بلاش غلبة يا فهيم. Tell me, and in 2 days I'll get you the queen of beauty in the whole world. So I took this for granted. I never asked why. He's asking why she is rejecting. So this is the atmosphere when we were brought up. That takes me immediately to what is the great danger is we are all facing. I remember only, we went to a place where all of the files were there. And I found, incidentally خالص, a file مكتوب عليه ملف سيد أفندي قطب. Said Qutb was condemned after that as a terrorist, and that was his file. But I noticed that he was very, very polite addressing the cultural council. And the cultural council was very decent with him. He was not yet يعني, characterized as a terrorist at all, because he was studying in California. And I found in his file 4 or 5 letters full of politeness addressing the cultural counselor, and vice versa. Very decent conversation. But after that, يعني, some bad guys reported me to the authorities because they asked me to go a big gathering, and they asked me to attack the Islamic movements in the whole world. I said, you are coming to the wrong address. I have no knowledge of the other organizations that deserve this. So I will go, I will specify what went wrong with these groups, but beyond this, I have no authority and I don't know. You are coming to the wrong lawyer. After I was released, I said many lectures. As a matter of fact, my surprise was they took me to a prison. And there they said, we want you for a lecture tomorrow. I went to the lecture assuming that there would be 10, 20, 30. I found 1,500 imprisonments. And I couldn't attack them. It was too much for me, and I didn't know anything about them. Ironically, 2 people sitting on the front row used to know me, as was living 20 meters from the mosque. So every early morning I would go, say the prayer in 10 minutes, and he was very intelligent. He never exceeded 5 to 7 minutes. So I learned to like him. The other man was the registrar of the law school of Cairo University, where I was studying. So I saw both of them sitting in the first row. I couldn't control myself. I cried, and they cried. It was funny. But nothing happened to me. But what I see now is frightening. It's frightening. In what sense? I'm a lawyer. I believe in the role of human rights in developing humanity at large. All the distinctions between different religions are not that serious. What difference does it make if you believe in Jesus Christ in a certain way that differs from the belief of a Christian? It's his right. It's his privilege. We never thought of attacking anybody. So Egypt was really heaven. People were very nice to each other. I remember when they had one of their sons married, we gave them our apartment. They came, Fahim and Labib, and we treated them like brothers exactly. I'm just saying that to explain to you why I feel very much bad about the prevailing situation in the Arab world and in the Muslim world. I read some things written, and I hear some people giving lectures that are catastrophic. Daesh and Daesh and these things, these are catastrophic things. They don't represent the Islamic spirit. They don't explain or reiterate or reflect what is going on in families. Even, I'm talking Christians, but also the Jews. One of our neighbors was, and has a shop, but he was Jewish. And he insists every time, if I stop saying these prayers, he said, سكت ليه يا ابو البنك دي قول عشان نقول وراك آمين آمين. And he looked typically like the Jewish old man. He had a big belly, and he was wearing suspenders and a sandal in his feet. So I was trying to even, why the shock? Why I'm shocked actually when I read to some people or listen to them attacking other people unnecessarily. Now, I found out that something went wrong with the religious Muslim discourse. Some preachers are preaching violence. Others are preaching boycotting any Christian organization. Even some criminals among them attacked churches. I cannot deny this. It did happen. But that was a serious aberration, a serious betrayal to the spirit of all religions. After all, Moses was a prophet. Jesus was a prophet. Up till now, I divide my loyalty when I am in a state of anger and I want to be aggressive. I remember the prophet Moses. When I'm in a very relaxed relationship, I remember Jesus Christ. When I'm a mixture, I remember Muhammad. And I believe that they were all very good people. So what is the fuss about this? It is in this spirit that I prepared this lecture. This lecture will be abbreviated. I will just make the major points, and I will leave to future situations or gettings. And if you would kindly distribute it, so we can come at a later, and I'll translate it into English, because our audience is not only Egyptian, and all these good brothers are entitled to receive the message and to discuss it in a friendly, brotherly atmosphere. Now, how many minutes?
Yes, we will. I will print the copies and distribute them, and we will also have it translated into English and make it available. The English version will take some time, but we will take everybody's email and send them the text of the lecture. And but the Arabic version is available and will be available outside right now, and we will communicate with everybody the English version as well.
With your permission, Dr. Ismail, I'll just give 5 lines with the main lines here, and all the details will go into the text in print. I criticized strongly the religious dialogue and discourse that is being preached and by many people, religious people. Number 1, the negative aspects of the present discourse preached and told by many Muslim leaders, not necessarily in Egypt. Egypt is the least of these countries embracing this violent attitude. Factor number 1, intimidation and creating a situation of fear. This is immediate result of the language itself and of the threatening promise. Number 2, I read most of the Quran, so I quoted at least 30 or 40 verses that can only be leading to the meaning I want to preach. Number two, an attitude of making life difficult for everybody, تشديد على الناس, which runs diametrically opposed to the preaching of Islam. Number three, and I have a quotation, very nice quotation, by a great Muslim scholar. He says, ليس العلم في التشديد. Science and Islamic science does not appear in tashdid. That's easy for everybody to claim. But the real meaning of Islam is based on science that authorizes easy preach. And Allah Ta'ala ليس العلم في التشديد فإنه يحسنه كل أحد إنما العلم الرخصة من ثقة والله تعالى يحب أن تؤتى رخصه كما تؤتى عزائمه. وبعدين لازم يعرفوا إن الشريعة الإسلامية the Islamic system of law is based on making things easy and affordable by everybody. And they quote, and I quoted 3 verses, هو اجتباكم وما جعل عليكم في الدين من حرج الآن خفف الله عنكم وعلم أن فيكم ضعفا. And he described the mission of the Prophet Muhammad and all other prophets as يضع عنهم إسرهم والأغلال التي كانت عليهم. أن يقول إلى آخره. Sayyida Aisha, the wife of the Prophet, she is quoted to have said about her husband, the Prophet, ما خير رسول الله بين أمرين إلا اختار أيسرهما. If he has 2 options in any situation, he would pick and follow the most lenient and affordable by everybody. Then, بعد كده, what is the attitude of a Muslim towards life? Sometimes these people call him to hate life, but exactly the opposite. We find many verses in the Quran, and I'll quote one only. وَابْتَغِ فِيمَا أَتَاكَ اللَّهُ الدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ. Look forward towards the hereafter. But do not forget or overlook your share in the pleasures of this life. ابتغ فيما أتاك الله الدار الآخرة ولا تنس نصيبك من الدنيا. Because we have seen people who claim to be good Muslims مكشرين كلهم. طب ليه? I have no reason to have any relation with them. So they actually make people hate Islam. Then, to put an end to this part, the Muslim is required to reconsider the real attitude of life, or of Islam towards life. When the one relative of Sayyida Aisha was going to Medina, he called her back and said, didn't you take one with you who would sing, know how to sing? And he found one of them, and he insists that he goes with this leader. So actually, Islam is not against enjoying life. But unfortunately, many people, not necessarily in Egypt, the Egyptians, بنقول عليهم فريحية. They like to enjoy things and enjoy life. And once, when I became responsible for this Islamic movement, I went to Aswan. There was a small village now. And I wanted to ask people, how do you think, what do you believe? There were 2 of them. I asked one of them, do you read the Quran? I read the Quran regularly. And وزودها شوية بقى قوي. His friend said, are you lying? You never read Quran. Why are you say that? He said, this man is coming from Egypt so that he can hear these good words from us. I wanted to please him. And he pushed him in the chest and said كده, قال له أنا أقول له كده وأنا وأنت نسمع على كيفنا. So I said, والله very interesting. بس خلاص. I'm finishing. I'll just read 2 lines of 3 pages. One very serious mistake of understanding Sharia of Islam and conveying it to the people who are ignoring completely the targets and the objective behind these prescriptions. نسميه الغفلة عن مقاصد الشريعة. And يعني insisting on the detailed. Another one before the last, an absence of a sense of priority. When you lose the sense of priority, you ask people to something that they cannot afford, that do not fulfill any. And lastly بقى, continuous and continuous talking about the past, and never talking about the present or the future. So if you go to a mosque, invariably كده, you will find out that 90% of the preaching is about the hereafter and about the past, very little about the future and the present. This is number 6. Number 7, this is most important, the relation between Muslims and non-Muslims. People assume without any basis that it is hatred and war and this and that. This is a cornerstone in the Islamic faith, that your relations with non-Muslims have to be peaceful, brotherly, together. Then the last thing about, I will suffice this. There was a funeral, and the dead was a Christian. So the Prophet stood up. Another Muslim told him, he's a Christian. He went very angry, and he said, isn't this a human soul? If the funeral comes before you, you have to stand up in respect. So actually that is a message that all these prophets are, all belong to the same belief in God, belief in the hereafter. All theoretical distinctions, we are not entitled to understand them fully. We don't lose much by ignoring them or overlooking them, not ignoring them, but to continue to respect the behavior of other believers in God. We had a Jewish neighbor. He was treated very kindly by us. And I was a witness to him when he went into a dispute over certain contract of sale. This is just an introduction to the paper. The paper has many quotations, and I'm continuing along this line. I travel a lot. I went to countries where Muslims are treated very badly, and on the other hand, in other countries where Muslims are almost criminal, because the social and the economic strife led them to this. I think we are duty-bound to re-explain the essence and the spirit of all relations without distinction, or else we will be shuraka in this campaign of hatred that is filling the atmosphere in many parts of the Muslim world. Yes, I'm being attacked by this, and I'm a Saidi, I'm from Upper Egypt, so we are hot-headed. I went to the court 2 weeks ago, suing someone who is aggressive unnecessarily, and they accepted كده, and they punished him a fine 100,000 pounds. I didn't touch him, but I am happy that I prevailed, and he is trying now to improve our relation together. Yes.
Thank you very much, Professor Aboul, for sharing your life experiences and wisdom. Now we come to the last speaker, and as it is said in Arabic, ختامه مسك. Ambassador Farida Al-Lagi. She is the representative of Libya at the European Union. She has spent many years in exile as a political opposition activist against Gaddafi regime. Dr. Al-Lagi has worked closely as an advisor on human development, policy formulations, strategic planning, fundraising, networking, and a capacity building within several UN institutions. Dr. Alagi, you have the floor, Madam.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I wonder how much time I have. I'm afraid you're going to have tough time to stop me. Well, Dr. Ismail, thank you very, very much for the invitation. I have been in this hall for almost 10 years في مؤتمرات الإصلاح العربي with youth, with women, and I think the journey, even in our region, has been very long. For 50 years, I have been in this journey, and I'm not giving up. So democracy is not new. We don't need to debate it as if it has never happened in this region. Those who have been hanged were Arabs. Those who have been imprisoned were Arabs. Those who have been tortured were Arabs. Those who left their countries have been Arabs. So we have paid a very, very heavy price, men and women. Dr. Ismail, I hope the day will come. Here we are talking about democracy and equality and justice. 13 women speakers and 48 men speakers, men, in this same conference where you are talking democracy. So there will be no democracy on this planet if this system is continuing to continue, because I really think, and here I'm not talking about women, men, we are all diving together. The situation is catastrophic, but I think on this day, I have to salute Dr. Al-Qubaisi, who want to be the first head of an Arab parliament in the Arab Emirates, and I really congratulate her, and I want to congratulate the Egyptian women, who also 86 Egyptian women are going to be members of the parliament, and for sure, I have to salute the Libyan woman who started the revolution, and on this Human Rights Day, أترحم على زميلاتي, my three best women friends that have been killed by extremists, Salwa, Wantisar, Fariha. So when I talk today in front of you as women, I think the time has come also for our intellectuals, our people, to realize that if this region has really to move forward, definitely, and under no circumstances, this total negligence, this total forgetting of women. Daesh have been training their women. Daesh women have been trained on how to go out and kill. We don't want to be trained of how to go out and kill. But I think for 40 years I have been touring the world talking about, I'm very, very proud, I'm very lucky to be a Muslim woman, an Arab woman, a Libyan woman. I lived in Saudi Arabia for 20 years, and I just received today so many messages from my friends in Saudi Arabia, the women who are going to the election in the municipality. The day that I think the Pandora box of Saudi Arabia will open up, the whole world, even in the Arab region, will be very surprised. So I want to come to say that the Arab region today, the Arab world today, definitely in turmoil. I thank you, Dr. Ismail. I really think the mere fact that it's 6:20, and we have been here in this room since 9:30 in the morning, and the room is still full, this is a significant indicator that we have really, I have learned a lot from every speaker. Thank you very much. There has been very beautiful collective intelligence in this room. And I think also, despite the fact that I got a feeling, I'm a humanist, Dr. Aboul was telling you his story. My story, 4 years old, I started my education in the church in Tripoli. My best friends were Jews. Every Saturday we go and we hide under the bed and see how they pray. The first day I come from the church, I was training myself how to pray, and my father comes and he tells me one God. That is my religion. That is Islam that we know, our generation. But again, what angers me at times, for almost 40, 50 years, dialogue between religions, dialogue between the North and the South, dialogue between civilization, dialogue between men and women, dialogue and paper and conferences and meetings and here where we are today. So it seems to me, I have to say, this whole game of really just pleasing each other or theorizing about what should happen and nothing has happened has to be radically changed, has to be radically changed. Okay, we spent 40 years of our life being in the opposition against the rulers. We have been really tough on them. Then we said, well, maybe diplomacy will happen. Then Islah will happen. Then we tried all recipes from in 2001, 2002. I have been on the board of the Arab Human Development Reports, and we thought and we said it very clearly: this region will explode. And the 4 deficits that these reports have been saying, the first one was freedom. The women's empowerment was a major deficit. I'm not talking about woman liberation, but I have to be honest with you. As long as we are in this region postponing the woman agenda, postponing the youth agenda, what youth? We have been promising and lying to them for 20, 30 years. We have been talking about, women, when they have government and when they have meetings and when they're still bringing them as decorative pieces. And I think our sad story, here I am, 50, 60 years, I'm 67 years old. I had a tumor in my head. I was almost gone and not seeing any of my dream coming true. When the doctor told me you have a tumor, I told him, no, I can't have a tumor, I'm not going. I have to stay because I have an agenda to finish. Democracy is just crawling. But this crawling of this democracy that will never, ever reach us. So the mere fact that you see many of us, and I don't want to offend all of us, you have your white hair, but I dye my white hair. So all of us who have white hair, for you in the West, I really think, I hope this message you have to carry it with you, as if we are iron human beings, because 50 years we have been fighting nonstop, not giving the hope, trying everything, up and down. Those some of you here have been in prison. Many of you have been, threatened with many threats. But nevertheless, here we are again and again. My dream, I came back to Libya after 42 years. I celebrated my dream in Libya only for 3 years. 3 years. And in 3 years, we surprised the world. Election. Oh, Libyan went to election, everybody. Who are these Libyans under Gaddafi? 42 years. Gaddafi, that no matter what they tell me, many of my friends, they told me, Farida, stop reminding the West that they were his friends. You are offending them. We don't need to repeat that. No, I have to repeat that because the time has come that this file of the Western politician and Western greedy businessman building them, all this building, and taking the millions of petrodollars to them, and not talking about the violation of human rights, this game has to come to an end. And this is what we are really now hoping from our friends in Europe and in the West. The time has to come up. Stop selling the equality and the human rights and the democracy and the justice, because this is for your people, for your children, for your youth, but not for ours. They have been blind with all the dictators in this region. So don't blame us where we are today. Don't blame Libya. Now, they are going to have this conference in Italy for Libya on the 13th of December. The dungeons that have been built for Gaddafi with millions of dollars, by whom have been built? By whom? The American, the German, the Italian, the French. This truth has to come to the table. I hope the day will come when we have to say you and us, because as I told you, I'm a humanist by nature. All of you, him, all of you, we have wonderful human beings. Sadly enough, we are all now engulfed with this anger, engulfed with this lack of trust, engulfed with you and us. What I've been telling them at the EU now, Daesh is there, the immigrants is there, the catastrophe is there. Sadly enough, we're not sinking alone this time. You have left us being tortured by the dictator for 42 years. This time, you are coming to be sinking with us. Why the EU for 4 years, why the West for 4 years have been not listening to us? We have been repeating ourselves. in Derna, since the day that Gaddafi was gone, we knew that Al-Qaeda was in Derna. Come and help us, help our army. We need to build a good Libya, a democratic Libya. And the Libyan by nature, we are all Maliki. We have no radicalism. We are simple people. They were fed up from Gaddafi. When the revolution started, they didn't say religion and Islam. No, they say freedom, dignity. All our people, that's what they want, because this is a human nature. Wherever I travel, and by the way, let me tell you the bad news, dear politician, whenever, or dear intellectuals, no, whenever I travel, zero confidence in politicians, zero confidence in the blah, blah, blah of the intellectuals, because also the dictatorship has not only been political, has been also intellectual. I think the gap between those who think and those who live in reality is so huge. We have heard from all of you what is the situation of political parties. Thank God we as women have been discriminated against and we have not been part of this mess. But we can no longer stay aside, because I don't want my granddaughter to go through what I have gone through. So what I think now in Libya, I don't need to tell you what's in Libya. Libya is really an inferno, with all the meaning of the inferno. Libya has not been left alone. 3 years when we have been left alone. When we have been left alone for 3 years, we had the civil society activities and movements, and 1,000 NGO all of a sudden. We had political parties, even if they were very weak and no law for political parties. We have demonstration, we had election, we had artists, everything was flourishing. I was demonstrating all the time in the streets of Libya. I have been demonstrating since I was 12 years old, and I don't know how God is still giving me this patience to continue to hope, because all these years, my daughter, when she talked to me and she said, Mama, where you are going? I'm going to this conference. She said, Mama, can you please stop? Did you win on any agenda that you have been fighting for? None. But nevertheless, I know we will die, but our duty to continue. Libya today, yes, we do have all this. Of course, the danger that we are facing in Libya today is the following. Libyans have not been left alone. I told my Tunisian ambassador at the EU, I told him maybe if nobody interfered, we could have shared the Nobel Peace Prize with you. But because we have the oil and the gas, it's not only politics, extremism, and religion, it's economics, it's money, it's business as well. Because if Libya would have been the poorest of the poor, like we were before the discovery of the oil, nobody would have been coming to Libya. So Libya has been sliced by different players, from the region, from the international, and then it started with Al-Qaeda in Derna. Then very quickly, everybody started to be pouring in Libya, and then the Libyans have been divided. 2 groups, 3 groups, 4 groups, fear, killing, kidnapping. The human rights report that was issued only last month, I'm sad, I have to say that, even if Gaddafi was my enemy. The situation in the Libyan prisons, more or less, are like the situation during Gaddafi. Corruption. I think for me, that is really the cancer of our region as a whole. Corruption. Billions have been spent in Libya in the last 4 years, and today we have hundreds and thousands of Libyan displaced people and refugees, who many of them, unfortunately, in this winter we are still hoping that somebody will help them with the medication, with the food, this is Libya today. So, no, I'm waiting. Okay. No, never mind. Why it didn't ring when you were all talking? Let it ring. I have to finish.
I thought you appreciated that.
No. I will finish. No. I have to finish. I was monitoring for each one of you how long you spoke. So, no, I monitored. No. I will finish. I will finish, but I will finish. I am a woman who will never, ever accept injustices. But never mind. As a respect to you, because they are also tired, I will wrap up. I will finish. But It has not been fair to leave also the only woman speaker, the last one to speak. Not fair. Yes. So let me now just try to wrap up. I think I got a bit confused now, but never mind. I will fix my brain. No. The reason why I spoke a little about the past, and many people say, forget the past. How you forget the past? The past led to the present, and the present is going to lead to the future. All what's happening today is the accumulation. What's happening in Libya is the accumulation of what Gaddafi has done to us 42 years. And what now everybody is doing to us today by playing their games. We have countries that are really having their games on the soil of Libya. We have to tell them, get away, get out from Libya. You have not been helping us. The EU, why our borders were open for 4 years? Where is the technology and the satellites not watching these thousands of Daeshi in and out? We have over 40 nationalities today in Libya. So I think what we need now to come to Libyans are responsible, but are they also only Libyan? If they don't come together, our problem, the Libyan intelligentsia has not been able yet also to have a one unity front. The ego and the lack of experiences in the past of having political parties, and now many of our intelligentsia and many of our political leaders are dispersed in different parts of the world. That is also another reason that's not helping us. Also, many Libyans have been taken for their own, few Libyans, not many, because there are very good Libyans. Few Libyans have also been taken by different political groups in different countries. Those who want to do business in the future, those who want to be politicians, those who want to be ambassadors, so there has been so much ugliness and so many games. And so here we are theorizing and thinking and talking about all these great values. But the problem today, when we see what's happening on the ground in our countries, we had 4 UN representatives to help us exit from the Libyan mess. 4, not 1. We hope the 4th one will be better than the three ones before him. They have really added to the mess. They added to the division of the Libyans. They added to the confusion. So here we are, I think. We are caught up between our neighbors. We are caught up within the international community. We are caught up between the European, and now the EU has a policy towards Libya, but the Italian one policy and the French one policy and the German another. There are so many different policies. And like what you have said, Your Excellency, Dr. Amr Moussa last night, they have been really taking the Libyans, managing the crisis for almost 4 years. And the EU and the West only started realizing that maybe there is terrorism in Libya when the poor Coptic were beheaded and when the Ethiopian. And let me tell you, our colleagues here, Abdul Hafid is with me, my friend Idris with me, thousands of Libyans have been also beheaded. Nobody talked about them. Nobody knew about them, even if they were in the news. And they were killed, and they were tortured. And until yesterday and the day before, 3 young children were kidnapped a year ago, 3 weeks ago. Today, we got the news of a 3-year-old has been kidnapped. Kidnapping, drugs, military, merchant, Daesh, wars, hate, all of this package. It's definitely, and I feel so sad inside me, but I will conclude by saying, we will not give up. We will get out of it. The Libyans are really coming into terms because many Libyans are realizing by the time they depend on our neighbor, or the EU or the UN, I think Daesh will finish all of us and will take us all under its arm. So we are realizing that the game is over, no war of ideologies, different camps are coming together, different groups are coming together. Women are very, 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 very active because we know what happened in Sirte. The women in Sirte, who's talking about what's happening for our women in Sirte who are being raped by all these Daeshis who are there? Young girls are being raped now by all these Daeshis who are there. So this, I think, in my opinion, we need your understanding. We need that you really shed the lights on the different sides of what's happening in Libya. And what we need most, I think, and the time has come for all of us, I think the good humans needs to be connected. We are all the same. Leave religion and leave sex and leave rich and poor. Everybody today is scared, everywhere, the rich and the royal and the poor and the old and the young and the educated and the uneducated. And what we also need, we need to go back down to the people. I worked all my life with people. I was in Cairo 20 years ago working with street children, and I was shouting to everybody, these children will grow up to kill you because they are seeing what you are doing, and nobody was listening. And this is our problem. We all know the solution. We all have been talking about solution. We all have been debating among ourselves, but we have not been in positions of power. And many of our idiot leaders, e-leaders, not only on the top, all across, they never wanted to listen because they were not equipped, they were handicapped, they were not able, they were only busy collecting money and being enslaved to their big bosses. I think the younger generation, let me assure you, what the young generation in the Arab world are coming up with is more wonderful. Therefore, I would ask all my friends with white hair, the time has come that we need to go back and we need to let these future promising young leaders to come to the forefront. One of them told me, but Farida, they don't have the experience. I told them, for heaven's sake, what has your experience accomplished? Nothing. Let them now try with whatever new mechanism. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Madam, for your very passionate speech, and please be assured that everybody is sympathizing with your cause here. Your cause is our cause. But I have 2 points to tell you that please go and tell your daughter that you won the agenda of the day here. You said she always questioned you that you never won an agenda, but I think you have won an agenda today. And and secondly, you said that all gray-haired people come here. Next time I will dye my hair. I will come.
And some of us don't even have hair.
It's a bold statement, huh?
Beautiful. Well, after these light moments, let me open the floor for some questions, short and crisp, but yes, please. Dr. Ghazali.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. In fact, I want first to greet all the speakers, especially Farida Al-Alaqi, my dear friend Farida Al-Alaqi, who is a fighter in all cases. So I want to greet Farida especially. But the title of this session is Extremism and Politics and Religion. But all the speakers confined their speech on the relation with between extremism and religion. That's good. But I think, number one, that this interpretation is some sort of progressive interpretation, rational interpretation, which in fact is not the case with those who are committing this extremism, simply because they have also their interpretations, they have their verses, they have a total building of interpretation of Islam. So this is very controversial. Number two, I think that mainly the Islamic terrorism is a political phenomenon before any other thing. And you did not tackle this issue at all. Simply the encouraging of Islamic movements was made by capitalism and by the United States to fight communism in this region. And also they used the Islamic organizations and allegations also to fight nationalism. So it is very important here to analyze these political factors which are still working concerning to explanation of this very dangerous phenomenon, the terrorism. And it's also, for example, it is not accident that the appearance of the Muslim Brotherhood, who I think that they are one of the main fathers of terrorism, happened in Ismailia, where the headquarters of Suez Canal Company in the 30s of the last century, and they encouraged it directly by the British to fight communism and to fight nationalism. So this is very important to understand these political reasons, and I am sorry because no mention has been made in these presentations to these very important factors. This is a political factor behind this very, very dangerous phenomenon. Thank you.
Yes, Dr. Badrawi.
I thought 10 times before I say my question. You all know that I am passionate about education, and you all mentioned that the education system in our region and in the world is one important factor in creating all the phenomena that we see in the world. My question to the panel, who are more expert in religion more than me, is the following. We are talking about the values of education, the critical mind of our kids, don't accept without thinking, and don't search for reasons and proofs. And the whole concept of religious education, of religion, is faith, which is acceptance of what you don't know without a reason. And there is a conflict between what we really teach our kids in school, of being critical-minded, of thinking of proofs, and at the same time telling them when it comes to God, you have to have faith and accept without asking. Can you enlighten us how to get this confusion? Because I think confusion in the mind of the young people can create abnormal behavior.
Yes, Professor.
Maybe to encourage you, Dutch history might provide a lesson. Not many people realize themselves that even though we have a kingdom now, we were a republic before. And when Americans cannot understand it, I tell them that we have passed the stage of being a republic. Of course, you only need the symbolic head of the state. We always had a parliament. And so we did swear off the Catholic king of Spain, and we became a republic. We had 80 years of war to become independent and to get rid of the Spanish Inquisition. The last 30 years were kind of doubled with the 30 years war between Germany and Sweden and so in that part. This all was concluded by the Westphalia Peace Treaty. But the Westphalia Peace Treaty were many different peace treaties. Most of them did, in fact, stipulate that it would be the head of state, king or duke or whatever it was, to decide what the religion of the country would be. In the case of the Netherlands, it did state that there was freedom of religion for all people. They were not equal rights. There was a kind of national religion which was for the oranges then, but there was freedom of religion for every citizen. Of course, in that time, with the parliament, everyone after 80 years was tired of terrorism and extremism because it was called the war, but mainly it was extremism and terrorism. And everyone had found that it was impossible to win over all the power. So they agreed that there was a kind of sharing of powers. So the moment we got a modern parliament, we had a Roman Catholic party and a Protestant party, strict, and one more progressive, and then the socialists and the liberals. We were what was called a pillar society. When you were Roman Catholic, you went to a Roman Catholic school. You became the member of a Roman Catholic trade union. You did buy your bread with the Roman Catholic bakery, not other. This situation did basically exist until 1960. Only now you can see that all these differences are kind of evaporating. The only place where the pillars came together was in the parliament. And thanks to the proportional representation, every group was kind of represented in relation to their share in the population. And as a consequence, there were always coalition governments. You always had to take into account that next time you could be out of the government and another in. So you always had to take care of the others. So this might be a solution in very complicated countries to have proportional representation, to move forward in this way, to see that everyone can have his own life without interfering with each other. And then wait and see.
Thank you very much, Dr. Farida, for a very inspiring speech. And in particular, you said that you're very sad that the Western powers have left Libya alone for the last 4 years. And as you know, I spent a lot of time in Libya during the last years. And when I was there, Libyans tended to say that actually this is a Libyan revolution. We want to deal with our problems ourselves. We want to find Libyan solutions, and please leave us alone. Please don't mess with us like you've messed with Iraq or Afghanistan. Let us deal with our problems alone. And I think that was a message that many Western diplomats and envoys received, and which in the end resulted also in this very light engagement in Libya during the last 4 years. So therefore, 2 questions for you. Number one, what concretely should have been done differently during the last years? And number 2, what exactly do you want from Western nations now?
Thank you. Now I will give 2 minutes for every speaker to answer, and I will start with Dr. Ghazali's remarks, I think, which I need to address. Of course, the way papers were designed and titles were given came out as the way you have seen it and listened to it. And it was not possible that one can cover everything in his paper. Perhaps this should have been dealt in different papers. But I would certainly agree that imperial powers had certain role in different stages of our contemporary history on dealing with these quote-unquote Islamic movements. And the one our generation knows very well is the jihad, the call to jihad in Afghanistan. The jihad in Afghanistan was American jihad. And they found people like Abdullah Azzam and et cetera, and they took them, and Osama bin Laden and others, and they were the mujahideen. That was how jihad started, and now jihad is all over. Everybody is mujahid, you see. So this is, of course, an important point. I will suffice with that, and I will leave the floor for Dr. Ismail. Also 2 minutes, please.
Yes, very quickly on the question of Dr. Hussam Badrawi for reason versus faith. I would commend to you that you read the book The Rock of Ages by the great scientist Stephen Jay Gould. It's been translated into Arabic, and I wrote the introduction for the Arabic edition. where he basically says that there are two domains, and they are non-overlapping magisteria. One has philosophy and religion, and they have a constant dialogue throughout history, and the other one is empirical science. And the kinds of questions that empirical science answers or can answer are not the same as the other ones, so there's no overlapping between them. For example, can you build an atomic bomb? That is a scientific question, and the answer would be yes. Should you build an atomic bomb? That is not a scientific question. There is no scientific answer for that from the empirical side. I told Steve, add also a third, at least a third, if not a fourth one as well, the appreciation of art. It is neither subject to philosophy and religion, nor is it subject to science. So there are many things that enter a human consciousness, and we need all of them. And Stephen Jay Gould was one of the greatest scientists, and he was one of the founding members of the board of the library, who passed away at a very young age.
I think there's now last two questions left to Dr. Farida. You have the floor. No. You? Sorry. Okay.
Just one comment on the first about politics and the topic we have discussed here. I think that we have, during these 2 days, had a very well exposition of the political issues. And the designation of this panel, I think, rightly tried to raise the question about the role of religion. And we had to sort out. I left party politics in 1979. I had been a deputy minister of culture and religion and education, a deputy to parliament and city council of Oslo. I have that political background, but I see my role today in dialogue with politicians and academics to try to bring in that dimension of faith and spirituality and values which are not defined only in political and materialistic terms. And this is also, if I tie to your question, I acknowledge the dilemma, but I don't think that there is a real conflict. The ethical dimension that we need to convey to children and grandchildren: have respect for life, deal honestly and fairly, speak truthfully. These are matters that can be communicated with the ethics of religion and with ethics of no religion, but it is not similar to mathematics and history. And I think we have to differentiate on that. And finally, to my sister and prophet, I was reminded of Martin Luther King. He spoke about the promised land, and I think that we need to speak about the promised land in every land, as you have been doing.
Dr. Farida, please, you have the floor.
Very quickly, Anne, I don't think you understood me. I didn't say we wanted the West to stay. I just said the opposite. I wish they didn't stay. Because no, I don't think we regret it, because they have messed us up a lot. Not denying that they have helped also at the beginning of the revolution, but then they messed us up. What we want, I think we want respect, transparency, we want honesty, we want flow of real information. We want them to don't play this hypocrisy, especially with political Islam, like what my friend Dr. Ghazali said, because I think he's very, very right in that, because when they came to Libya, the mess that they, particularly British Americans, everybody, okay, even during the dialogue, the ambassador were in the corridors of the dialogue for 1 year. Why they have to be there, and then they say it's a Libyan dialogue? I think also now the new neighborhood policy, we want to feel that we have ownership of what they are deciding. Now they're deciding many things for Libya. When the EU decided this Envoro the attacking of the migrants, we didn't knew about it until they went to the Security Council, and then they told them, no, go and ask the Libyan. So I really think we do hope. We are, all of us, whether we are in this region, we are all connected. We are all affecting each other. It's not the hate, it's not the you and us, but what affects us, what hurts us. There is so much hypocrisy in the Western relationship with our region. And we are saying we can no longer swallow that. We know the game, we read, we have a new, they did it 30, 40 years ago, but they're not going to be able to continue to do it, no matter how weak we are now, how unable to really at times solve our problems. And like somebody this morning have said it, and they've said it over and over, yes, for the West, they need to be a little bit really humble, because now all the experts on Libya are only Western. When I go to meetings at the EU, all those speaking about solving the Libyan problems, there are no Libyans. As if you are not able to solve your own problems. Get busy with your own inner problems and leave us alone, because also I told them that they should come when they really also learn from us. Why you don't want to learn from us? We have been handling this mess for 50 years now, and we are still dreaming and working and thinking and, hoping and not stopping and loving. And so I really think we're all together now, all together again and again. And I'm a strong believer in what you have said. I think I will give up working with adults. I have to go and invest in children. Forget those over 40 and 50 to change them. We need, if we start today with the little children, with the brain of little children, how to love and how to respect and how to really accept each other's, I think in 20, 30 years in this region, we are going to have better men, politicians, and better women, and better society. Otherwise, I think it's not going to happen.
Well, thank you very much I thank the all panelists. And before I conclude this panel, I have a small comment to my friend, Bishop Starr, about the Nobel Prize. It was really great surprise and happy surprise to see the Nobel Prize for this year given to the Tunisian quartet. But I think that decision was not a complete one. It needed to include Ghannouchi with it. Without Rashid Ghannouchi, this peace was not possible. It was his wise interpretation of his own people and calming down his own people and coming to terms with secular forces in Tunisia that helped reaching that. Had it been a different way, it would have been a very tough time, and it would have been unsuccessful example. So this is just small footnote to your remark on the peace of this year, Nobel Peace this year.
And then I say I was not in the committee.
That's all right.
Okay. Well, but you're still listening to me.
I am.
Okay, thank you, gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, thank you and good evening.